That's where the success point happens, in that very initial dramatic weight loss.
Quite extreme.
Seems extremely extreme.
50% American adults have got diabetes or pre-diabetes. About 80% of those people don't even know. We've got Dr Anita Beckwith, a consultant dietitian. We're talking today about one of the biggest preventable health risks.
An 800-calorie diet, you can reverse the effects of type 2 diabetes, but the adherence on that would be extremely low.
If you're able to lose a 10 to 15 kg in that first 2 to 3 months, that's the big indication of going into remission. Any weight loss is going to have a benefit. Symptoms can be quite vague. You may have had type 2 diabetes for 10 years plus without even knowing, but we know at least 50% of cases can be stopped.
So what are the dietary changes that you would recommend? So it's very well established as a good tool for diabetes, but for weight loss, how do you see it?
I would say
The thing that you stick on your arm and then you've got your app on your phone, oh, this made your blood glucose spike. What is the deal with those?
it's very difficult to lose weight, but there's so many things that you can change.
Hi, I'm Jaymie.
And I'm Stacey.
And this is the Body Smart Podcast.
We are women's weight loss experts on a mission to empower you to take control permanently of your health and your weight. And we're talking today about one of the biggest preventable health risks that we're facing as a society. And that is diabetes, specifically type 2 diabetes, which is not the one that you tend to get born with. And there's actually a shocking amount of people with diabetes, both in the US and the UK. In the US, 37 million people are living with diabetes, and a further 96 million American adults have pre-diabetes. And the most shocking thing about this is about 80% of those people don't even know that they've got pre-diabetes. So we thought we'd better get somebody who knows what they're talking about on the podcast to help us with this. And we've got Dr Anita Beckwith with us today. She is a consultant dietitian and she specialises in diabetes and also fertility and women's health. So we thought perfect fit for the podcast. Thanks for coming down today.
Thanks for having me.
I just wanted to kind of ask you, as somebody who deals with this every day, it is such a huge problem, but I don't feel like it's something that we talk about. Well, we do because it's our job, but like general chat amongst friendship groups, it doesn't seem to be up there like breast cancer or heart disease. It's not something that people seem to be concerned about. Why do you think that is?
I think diabetes actually, because the numbers are actually so large and because we hear about it so much, that in an individual level, on a smaller conversation level, because it's so common and because actually the symptoms can be quite vague. So when someone's diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, they may have had type 2 diabetes for 10 years plus without even knowing that they've got diabetes, because symptoms can be things like being a bit more thirsty, needing to go to the toilet a little bit more than usual and feeling tired. And this is all to do with glucose levels and the loss of glucose. And weight loss can be one, particularly more with type 1 diabetes than type 2, that you'll see. So they can be quite vague symptoms that happen over time. So you don't really notice, people may not notice those things, and they may also equate them to other things. Part of that I'll often see is people thinking, well, I'm getting a bit older now, so yeah, I'm feeling a bit more tired. If we're thinking specifically for women, and we're thinking specifically for as we age, as we're going through into perimenopause, menopause, then we know symptoms can be things like fatigue. So there can be a crossover with those. So perhaps people haven't noticed those symptoms and haven't put them together. And thinking about it, perhaps when people think about diabetes, they think about potentially more acute episodes that can happen that are more common with type 1 diabetes than type 2. So people may feel that it's something so vague almost with those symptoms that it isn't a common discussion, I guess.
Yeah. And when you say it can take 10 years, that's not the average, hopefully, is it? How long?
Some people, because the symptoms are so vague, and there was Diabetes UK, which is a big UK charity here for diabetes, really a few years ago put a real emphasis on trying to diagnose these undiagnosed people. So part of this will be having health checks. So I know you guys are keen on measurements as well. So really, it's really important to go for health checks. So we know that over 40, you should have a GP health check. But actually, I'd say, to be honest, when you're over 25, 30, it would actually be worth
Oh,
having
really?
measurements for your making sure you know what your blood pressure is, your cholesterol, specifically what we nickname your bad cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol, and knowing where your blood glucose levels are, because you could potentially catch your blood glucose in a pre-diabetes type state earlier than developing diabetes itself.
Which is going to be, obviously, the earlier you catch it, the better and easier to change the behaviours around
Absolutely.
that. So how would someone go about that then if they're 25 or 30 listening and they wanted to go and get checked out?
Yeah, so they can ask at their GP to have those checks done. So certainly that's one thing when people have diabetes, they'll have these annual checks. So they will check things because type 2 diabetes is a cardiometabolic dysfunction syndrome. So it's not just the blood glucose, although you'll hear about it and very much approaches can be quite glucose-centric. It's certainly very much about blood pressure and LDL cholesterol and the impact of stored fat in the pancreas and liver, which mean that they don't work as well as they should be. And so you can certainly have those checks. There's obviously, you can have blood checks at different companies now. You're able to have those done and send them back. So I would recommend if you're not sure and you're not able to have them at the GP, they would be some of the standard ones to have checked.
And even if there's not something that you think, I'm maybe a bit worried, just to still do it almost as like an MOT and
Absolutely.
just a checkup.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah.
And I know you said it can take a long time and it's not maybe that tangible or the obvious that might be diabetes, but what is the danger if somebody's maybe pre-diabetic and it isn't treated? What can be the outcome?
Yeah, so sometimes, I'm not saying it's always 10 years that someone's diagnosed. We can certainly pick it up sooner than that. But for someone who has blood glucose levels, and it's about, what's really important to know about it, it's about this chronic raised blood glucose levels. It's not about blood glucose levels being transiently above range for a short period of time. It's much more about them being chronically above range. And what blood glucose loves to do is it loves to stick to our vessels, basically. So either small vessel or large vessel. So you'll hear of small vessel disease being microvascular, or we may talk about macrovascular, which are larger vessels. So larger vessels would be like your heart. Smaller vessels, we're thinking about your eyes, your kidneys, the nerves in your feet and your hands. So long term, people can have effects on that, so that it means that they may have nerve damage. So, for example, you may not feel if someone's walking on hot sand or sharp glass, if it was very extreme.
When you say long term, how long are you talking?
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
In terms of how long do those complications develop?
Yeah, because they sound quite extreme.
Yeah. So for some, it really varies, to be honest. And we talk about 10 years is often a number that's there. So it doesn't mean, I wouldn't be able to say exactly, because it depends on how chronically the numbers are.
Right.
And there are always outliers, like we know. So some people seem to have blood glucose that aren't, and these are the few because they are outliers, that will have blood glucose that aren't so chronically above range that may have some of those symptoms as well. So there's not an exact, which is why certainly, and the reason that you have the over 40s health check with the NHS is because we knew that over 40 it's more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. We're starting to see in certain populations like African, Caribbean, South Asian populations that we may be looking at more being over 25 as being where the health risks are. So as I was saying, it's like...
Why is that? Like, why? That's like, it's a pretty...
Yeah, it's genetic. Yeah,
Genetics?
so there's
Okay.
genetics and there's also aspects of thinking about the environment, so change of environment. And we've certainly seen that perhaps people who have moved from one of those countries to a more westernised country may also have increased risks because of the environment, because of nutrition, their diets and their activity levels as well. So yeah, I was saying about the nerve damage. So that's one part of it. So people may not have, sometimes people talk about having pins and needles, that sort of feeling, and that could be related. People also may have effects on their kidneys because there's small vessels in their kidneys, which means that they're not able, so our kidneys are like, think of like filtering out the things that we don't want, but they can also end up filtering out things that we do. So people may lose glucose in that way and proteins in that way. And that's where you'll see more of the weight loss, because glucose are calories. So if people are peeing out more glucose, then that's where weight loss comes. And thirst as well, and that's related to the kidney loss of fluids in that way. So those symptoms can come through in that way. So those long-term complications can be that they can affect and the other part is your eyes. So if glucose is sat in those small vessels for a long period of time, that will increasingly cause damage. And there can be transient effects. So if you can lower the numbers, then you can diminish the effect of that. And so it's tricky because with type 2, you can live with it for a period of time with not even knowing you have it and having very mild symptoms. So it doesn't seem as serious. So when you were going back to talking about the conversations that people are having, perhaps because so many people have it and perhaps the symptoms can be so slight or vague initially that it isn't seen as so acutely serious or a need to, but actually the long-term effects can be quite damaging to the body.
And do you think it's one of those things that people think, oh, it doesn't happen to people like me? You know, I'm not that unhealthy. I don't eat that bad of a diet. It's not going to happen to me.
Yeah.
But actually, if we looked at the US stats, that's 50% of the population have got diabetes or pre-diabetes.
It's huge, isn't it?
It's quite likely to be you.
It's insane, isn't it? It's actually insane.
It's and it's definitely grown over time. And I always say when I'm working with people of thinking, that sort of control the controllables or modify the modifiables. So there's certain aspects we've mentioned like genetics. So there's a strong genetic disposition with type 2 diabetes. So type 2 diabetes about either the body is producing more than enough insulin, but it's not being used as well as it should be in the body. And that's often linked with insulin resistance, which is linked with weight management. Or the cells that produce the pancreas are producing some but not enough, and it can be a combination. So it's quite complex in how that affects things. Then it affects the whole of metabolism, not just glucose, but fats and protein as well. The numbers are growing and growing. So thinking the genetics we can't change, there's certainly culturally certain aspects of that. So for myself, I'm mixed race, my mum's Sri Lankan, so straight away on Diabetes UK, if people want to, there's a little score that they can fill in and know their risks. So you can put in your weight, find out your BMI, your age. For me, my risk factor will be my mum's heritage, basically. But it is a stronger part, but I'm low risk, but that will be the thing that comes up for me. And certainly for myself, when I had when I was pregnant, that was the reason I had glucose tolerance tests and was tested for gestational diabetes, which is a type of diabetes which is transiently developed through pregnancy.
And that's because of your heritage.
Yeah, and that was the reason they pulled that up.
Yeah.
So those things, unfortunately, we can't change, and but those risks. But there's so many things that you can change, and that's where the focus is. So it's very difficult to move away. But we know, with there's definitely research looking at diet and lifestyle changes and factors, and there's at least 50% of cases can be stopped. Basically, the pre-diabetes, we can prevent diabetes happening if we're able to look at those things.
There's actually an amazing study I found, which was 61% of people with early diabetes or pre-diabetes, if they followed a strict exercise and diet regime for a year, they reversed it. 61%.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Si, I'll ask if you could pull this off. I wasn't recently, about 2 weeks ago, they put up was it either the NHS or the UK government have released a new diet. It's like, if you go on 800 calories,
oh yes,
an
I saw
800
that.
calorie diet, you can reverse the effects of type 2 diabetes. But it's
quite extreme.
That's very seems extremely extreme.
So what that is so it's what we will often talk about is more remission rather than reverse. So you'll always be, if you've developed type 2, you will always be at risk of type 2. So but what the research is that if you're diagnosed within the first 6 years, if you're able to lose a certain amount of weight, and the sweet spot's about 10 to 15 kg, which for a lot of people is about 10 to 15% of their body weight, which you often hear in lots of papers about reducing risk. That these people can actually come off, and remission means having blood glucose levels that are within a normal range. So for the long-term blood glucose measure that we measure, which is called an HbA1c or glycated hemoglobin, that's at a level which is below 6.5, and also coming off diabetes medications as well, and that might mean also blood pressure medications and other lipid medications as well. And actually those individuals who've been on that diet, and one thing that comes off and doesn't quite come through is that the 800 calorie diet's actually for somewhere between, depending on the person in the research is somewhere, say, between 8 to 12 weeks normally. It's only an initial period. So you'll have heard of it in the media, call it the soups and shakes diet.
Yeah. Is that the one that we're talking about, the path to remission program?
That's it. And then the second phase is where people are reintroduce food. So there's somewhere between 800 to 1,200, but it depends on the individual. And then the long-term maintenance part is when people are going up to having like a regular diet and managing that. And the data, so the path to remission data is from actually using that intervention in clinic. So this isn't in research. So we always know that sometimes we'll get better outcomes in research because obviously things are controlled a little bit more. And that comes from a previous trial called the DIRECT trial, which has also shown those benefits. And actually we're getting longer term data, and we know that not as many people, the drop-off happens with remission. So I think in the first year, they were looking at something like 46%, then it dropped down to about a third in about 2 years. And by 5 years, it's dropped more, but still, there's still a certain amount of people that's still in remission at that point. And we've never had anything like that in an intervention in this way. And then the other benefits are that people may still be off diabetes meds, or they may still, be managing and also supporting certain health behaviours. So it's very much managed, and also in terms of the individuals on that, because as you're saying, it's very extreme.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Like, surely, and just from understanding, generally people, the adherence on that would be extremely low. That would be my 2 cents. Is that, like, I can't see someone who's at least become type 2 diabetic to then go on an 800, 1,200 calorie diet. Like, it just seems, maybe they'll do it for a week or two, but then it's just going to drop back off.
So, it certainly isn't for everybody. And if you see the numbers that are actually referred to the programme compared to the numbers that complete, so certainly another, lots of money was being put into looking at other interventions, so other dietary options that people could use, and trying to look at, this is with the University of Oxford, looking at 4 different types of dietary interventions that then could be offered on the NHS to support people. So certainly that's a short-term measure, and certainly for something like that type of diet, initially there are issues with obviously socialising. So obviously if you're on very low diet like that,
and it's meal replacements as well.
Yes.
It's not even like we would say, watch your calories, but go out for dinner, but just choose something that's low calorie. Yeah. They're not going to do that.
Yeah, and the real reason that it's so marked is that if people are achieving that sort of, particularly the people that are achieving the 10 to 15 kilograms weight loss in that first 2 to 3 months, have a marked reduction in the amount of fat around their liver and pancreas. And that's the big point of this indication of going into remission. That's where the success point happens, in that very initial dramatic weight loss, but it's never longer term. So sometimes I think people have the thought that this is forever, and it certainly isn't. And certainly for some people, and if you go through and look at actually how the intervention was carried out, if it wasn't suitable for certain people, they used different elements of diets and found what worked for some people. So perhaps, say if a soup and shake wasn't, they try to equate that into a diet, and for some people it might have been shorter because they didn't they found that trickier, or they might have done it for slightly longer to get to the goal that they wanted to. So there's a little bit of flex around that.
And is the efficiency of it in terms of the remission because of how quick the weight loss is, or is it just because they would lose that amount of weight?
It's to do with that initial dramatic weight loss.
Right.
Yeah. And actually where that trial initially came, where the indication came from, was actually looking at what happened with bariatric surgery and the dramatic changes that happened from bariatric surgery, and where actually that started off being looking at weight loss, and actually we saw the benefits of what happened in blood glucose levels as well, and saw the benefits of people sort of going in remission of their diabetes after that. And so this sort of similar effect with this, but it's definitely about that initial rise, and then it's looking at loss, and then looking at where maintenance is following it. And it's still relatively new, and it's not for everybody, and that's what we know, don't we? We know, and I always think, like, life's a continuum anyway, so you'll find one part of something, for some reason you'll have a goal, and you can choose that and then choose something else. And I think a key part of all success, and I'm sure you're very used to this, is also the, the psychological impact of this, but also not looking at failing. It's trying something and seeing how that fits for you. And certain things might work in certain seasons of your life as well that work better.
Yeah. And so if somebody thought, do you know what, I know this probably is me that you're talking about. I probably do need to lose 10 kilos, but they are not an 800 calorie a day kind of person. They know they've probably tried like 10 different diets in the past. If they were to take a slow, sustainable approach and lose maybe that 10 kilos over 6 months, would they still see the benefits and see improvements?
Yeah, there's definitely data looking at whichever method of wherever people are losing weight. And if they're not getting to that sweet spot of the 10 to 15% that we hear a lot, 10 to 15 kilograms, any weight loss is going to have a benefit of improving insulin sensitivity, reducing insulin requirements or medication requirements. Big factors, as I was saying, it's not just glucose, so blood pressure, blood lipids, especially LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides as well in blood really make a massive impact on then the health benefits. And when we're looking at this, we're looking at cardiovascular disease risk. That's the primary thing. So anything like that's going to have a benefit, as well as improving muscle mass, bone health, Yeah.
Because my shock reading that was just like, oh God, here's the NHS coming out giving dietary advice around telling people to go on 800, 1200 calorie diets for people who are the least likely, in my opinion, to go and actually sustain that. And what we see so much with weight rebound is, all right, even if people were able to stick to that for 8 to 12 weeks, the likelihood that they're going to rebound as soon as they go back to their old habits and behaviors, and it's just going to lead into that vicious cycle of, okay, I did actually manage to grit this out for 8 to 12 weeks, lost that weight, but I done it on soup and shakes. And then what does my behavior and my diet look like after the matter? Which is what we see all the time. Like people just rebound heavily and often put the weight back on, and sometimes more, because you hit that kind of peak, like, oh, I've done it now, I've achieved it. Oh, I'll treat myself, and then that just spirals, and the weight fastly comes back on.
Yeah, and certainly, as I say, there's a longer term follow up, and certainly the 1 year, 2 year data, and then it's been not as intensive. And as we know as well, people having structure and accountability really supports anything where there's more. Any research you can look at where people are having more of that, they're going to maintain whatever the goals and outcomes. So we know that things are. So it's actually looking as well at where we can spend the money in the workforce to support people to be able to maintain that as well as possible, which is what they're looking at more, as well as these different dietary interventions.
Yeah. So obviously this is talking about if you're already at that point where it's become a health problem for you and you're on medication, then this would be when it's prescribed, this kind of intervention?
So this would be within the first, this particular research is within the first 6 years. So the remission part is within that time they see that you can actually achieve remission.
Right.
There is research using that type of intervention with people who've had diabetes, because obviously that's come out recently. So obviously it's been tested as well in other groups of people who've had type 2 for longer. And certainly we've seen weight loss coming off medications, blood pressure benefits, LDL cholesterol benefits as well. But there's also, you can look at that in terms of pre-diabetes as well. So people prior to developing diabetes being able to achieve a certain amount of weight loss.
And if, say, for example, somebody who's in that pre-diabetes group, because that is significantly larger group, thankfully, I'm guessing it doesn't need to be as extreme.
No.
So what are the kind of dietary changes that you would recommend? That's your thing, you're a dietitian. If somebody was pre-diabetic, that, you don't need to go to that extreme of soups and shakes, but follow maybe these 3 principles and make these 3 changes.
Yeah. So I'd probably go through, I don't know how to say 3 changes. I'd probably go through the options of what has worked and not worked for them before. And there is, whatever we know that a calorie deficit of some kind is the aspect. So some people will do more of lower carb. Some people maybe more lower fat. There's different parts of whether people are following a general Mediterranean dietary pattern, and it's the calories within that. So I don't know whether should I say a top 3? Because it depends on I'd look at their lifestyle and then see what's worked and not worked really for them and try and find intervention, because we know whichever way they do that, the calorie deficit and fitting that into their life's important. We've talked about food, but obviously, as you guys know, like the activity side of things is so important as well.
So sorry, just on
yeah.
that. So the first point I guess you're getting into is like a calorie deficit or some sort of methodology that would help you lose weight. But that's for somebody who has got weight to lose. And then what do you see as like defining a healthy weight? Is it a healthy BMI?
Yeah. So in terms of what we measure, we know it's population level. I know we could talk a lot about what BMI means. We can look at that being, between the healthy range of BMI between 18.5, and that's how we would look at that within the NHS, because it's still a tool to be able to use that. We don't have within that part of my work. I don't measure like body composition, and that would be something I would do in my private clinics. We can look more at that, and certainly
so that would be looking at body fat percentage and muscle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how would you measure that in your private?
So
practice?
I'd ask people to have a go for a DEXA or different scans, and if they're able to, and be able to do that. Or we can obviously look at waist circumference and be able to look at waist circumference as a simple measure as well, because obviously BMI is a good mark. We have to have something, and there's lots of, we can debate the use of that, but looking at what we can in simple terms in a clinic, looking at waist circumference is the other best way.
If you didn't know by now, I am a weight loss coach who lost 50 pounds myself, so I know how hard this journey can be. Jaymie and I built the Body Smart method to cut through the BS out there and bring together the latest weight loss science to fast track your weight loss. None of the frustrating trial and error that I battled with myself. In fact, over 4,000 women have lost 15 to 60 pounds within 6 months with us, whilst also gaining healthy habits, the knowledge and skills that they'll need to never diet again. We know you've thrown hundreds, if not thousands of dollars at this before and been disappointed endless times. At Body Smart though, we are so confident that you'll get results with our method. We have a full money back guarantee. To find out more, go to bodysmartfitness.com.
Getting to close to a healthy weight when it comes to a BMI would be a good first step. And then a healthy, it's your height to weight ratio, waist or height to waist ratio.
Yeah.
That is going to be like one of the best things that people can do in terms of managing possible pre-diabetes.
Definitely. And then, as we say, we also activity. So if we know if they can do any forms, particularly of like resistance training, building more muscle as well, whether we're able to measure it or not, but actually the actual point of doing it and achieving it and finding something that works for them that's consistent.
Why is muscle so important for somebody who is pre-diabetic?
Yeah. So it's more metabolically active tissue. We know that being able to use glucose in that way means that an individual is going to be more insulin sensitive. So they're going to be utilizing their glucose more effectively. They're going to be more sensitive within that way. So that helps to manage blood glucose as well as utilizing fat as well in that activity. But it's more about having more metabolically active tissue in that.
Yeah.
We think about muscles as like a sponge for, like, they need glucose to do their job. And so if you go and eat a donut and you've got a lot of muscle, there's a lot of helpful places to put that glucose to good use. Whereas obviously if you've got less muscle, there's less useful places for your body to immediately go and store that, where it's going to get burned quite quickly. And that's where insulin then has to come along and do its job. Obviously, we know this because it's our job. But I don't think necessarily people know the mechanics of why muscle is so important. And we bang on about it all the time. Like, women, please lift some weights, build some muscle. And it's not about necessarily looking lean or being stronger. For some people it is. But actually, in terms of how your body functions, it's really supportive for optimal function, isn't it?
Yeah. And in terms of muscle mass and also weight training in terms of bone health as well, and particularly when we're thinking about the body composition changes that happen in women as we age, it's so important. So also getting some of those behaviours in when we can, whatever age we are, and starting to have some consistency with that really supports our skeleton as well as you're saying, our muscle mass, and also supporting reducing the risks of developing diabetes, other cardiovascular risk issues as well.
Yeah.
Supporting blood pressure. So all of it impacts on supporting overall health. So it is, if we can do things as whenever we can, but as soon as we're sort of thinking about it, it's the right time to start if we haven't been already. There's always going to be an impact, and certainly 40s to 50s as we go through perimenopause and menopause, there's a big change in body composition, and really
if you're not looking after it, if you're not already training, because we do see that, don't we, with so many women. It's like if they've built that foundation and have kept it up and keep training them through perimenopause, menopause, it doesn't tend to change their body composition too much, but it's because they've built that foundation prior to going into, say, perimenopause.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or even if you do go into perimenopause and you haven't got the foundation, but that is the approach you then take, you then start lifting weights and eating more protein and fibre, and you are taking the right steps, you absolutely have more control over your body composition than we might be led to believe by certain parts of the internet. Obviously, we all know we should exercise. Like, we're told it from day one of leaving school and being a grown-up, where you're not forced to do PE anymore, but you should still exercise. But actually, I found there was a report that showed 31% of people with type 2 diabetes do no exercise, and 38% on top of that, 31%, do a little bit, but not the recommended minimums. So that is a huge majority. 69% of the people who really need it are not doing the exercise that could really help. So I'm wondering if in your clinic you see common obstacles that your patients will say, I know I should, but what are those reasons?
Yeah, it'll be normal reasons that lots of people have time, an interest or motivation in it. Then people will, I think, sometimes just not know how or not have the confidence to be able to do something. And also people will think, for some people it certainly is something that works, but sometimes people are very put off by the gym and with body image issues and reasons may not have that confidence to go in to do that, which is such a shame, because generally once somebody does and has that confidence and it builds, you can really see the shine in what's changing for them, and actually the achievement. It's always that thing that we always talk about, isn't it, that before you exercise, if people aren't feeling so keen, and then afterwards everyone always feels better because you've got the endorphin kick and you're feeling really
such a positive feedback
pleased with yourself. There is some interesting data looking at healthcare professionals with people with diabetes, and if they're people who exercise and are interested in it, they will more likely have that conversation with the individual in front of them, and if they're not, then they won't be having that conversation. So that's very, very interesting. We also know with diabetes, people will, and this evidence particularly is with type 1, but we can translate it to type 2. If people are on medications such as insulin, which lower blood glucose, people will be fearful of having a hypo, and which is a very normal part of having insulin. It will be part of it, but we'll be worried about that as well, so may not feel confident to exercise because of that. But certainly the healthcare professional link's very important, of having that conversation, normalising. This is part of it. You can totally be able to do this and have a healthy, normal life. This is so important for you. But actually not just saying activity or exercise, really pinpointing what it is, when that person's going to do it. We know about smart goal setting, looking at what that looks like for that person. Yeah.
And also I think addressing this expectation that it means going to the gym, because it doesn't necessarily mean going to the gym.
Yeah.
It can mean starting to go for a daily walk. It could be doing a YouTube video in your front room. It could be so many things. And if your starting point is nothing, 10 minutes is something. And I think that isn't necessarily communicated. Like we say, the recommended guidelines are 150 minutes a week. And for somebody doing nothing, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And when the first thing that you said was, it's because the time, they don't have time. And they're like, where am I going to find 150 minutes? Because that even sounds worse than 2 and a bit hours, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Yeah. I don't have any minutes. Where am I supposed to just go to the gym 3 times?
So we often break that down. So particularly, I always think of with our pregnant population. So if people have gestational diabetes or type 2 diabetes, we'll look at that because we're looking at their postprandial rise. So with gestational diabetes, it's about sort of an intolerance of carbohydrate almost. So post-meal they'll have a rise in blood glucose, and we're looking at that particularly around the hour to an hour and a half mark. So what we'll encourage people to do is to do at least 10 minutes within that hour post-eating to bring blood glucose down. There's a few other things, but that would be one of them. So if you break that down to 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 3 meals of the day, you've got your 30
And that 10 minutes
minutes.
is just going for a walk? Or,
Yeah, going for a walk. If people are quite heavily pregnant, we'll talk about, this always sounds silly and people say to me, you're running from a bear, but running, because I do that, just putting your hands up and down above you, because your heart has to pump quite hard to get the blood to your fingertips. So if people are quite immobile or not able to, you can still, just by doing stretching exercises, what it is, just pulling your hands up and down, and we wouldn't see that effect when people are, say, decorating at home. They'll lower their blood glucose more if they're, say, wallpapering or something. So similarly, if you're sat still, you can still find that you can do activities that can bring blood glucose levels down within that time.
That's actually really fascinating.
Yeah.
I never thought of that.
I started just jumping on I've got a treadmill in the garage at home, and if I have because we'll typically use like HelloFresh, so I'll just make it for 4 and then have that for lunch the next day, and sometimes the meals are bigger than others, and when they are, I'll just jump on the treadmill for 5 minutes after I've had the meal. It is obviously contributing to the blood glucose spike, but I was doing it more from like a cognitive ability, in the sense of like if I had a heavy meal and then just went back on my laptop and started working for the rest of the afternoon, I would feel that drop in energy and even cognition and feel a bit more tiredness. But just jumping on the treadmill for like 5 minutes on a slight incline, maybe a little bit more sometimes, I would just find I just would skip that like lull that I would have in the afternoon, which was great from like a performance standpoint when it came to work and being able to stay cognitively sharp.
We've actually got a request on this because we have a good office habit of when we have our lunch break, we go for a walk and then we have our lunch. And today we were having our lunch and we knew, we're chatting to you about blood sugar today. Like, why don't we eat our lunch and go for a walk? We should really do that way round. But even little changes like that, you might already have a habit where you just tweak things a little bit. Like, for example, in the mornings, I would usually, in the summer, I would walk my dog and then have my breakfast. In the winter, because the darkness, I'd do it the other way around. Actually, maybe I could just have my breakfast first all the time and then walk the dog, and that could help.
Brilliant. Yeah, definitely. And thinking about that, I've done consults certainly with people where I've said, should we go for a walk as well? Rather than just sat here talking, let's go out and get some fresh air and do, and normalise this thing that perhaps people have found barriers in doing. So you can do that and be like, oh yeah, this is achievable. This is something I can put into place in a day. Yeah.
It's good. I think when you start looking for all those like opportunities, like, oh, we're going to meet my friend for a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, and you go, hey, why don't we go for a walk and then walk to the coffee shop and get a cup of coffee? And it's like, then you've done 4,000 or 5,000 steps, and then you have the cup of coffee. It's just starts to encourage movement so much more.
At the weekend, I've got a friend who, it's actually my husband's friend's wife, and so it's like a friend of a friend that she's in our group, but like we don't have that much in common, and if we sit in the room, it's like a really difficult conversation. Like we don't have that much in common. But if we always go for a walk now, because we tend to, like, we've got dogs or kids or whatever with us at the time, the conversation just flows so differently. And I don't know what the psychological part of that is, but there might be actually times where you have a nicer time if you go for a walk instead of just trying to sit and have a coffee together.
Yeah.
So we've talked about walking after eating. One of the other things that you mentioned actually, Jay, is going viral at the moment, is there's a reel going around saying if you do 10 squats every hour, it has a better impact on your blood glucose levels than if you did a workout that day. True?
There is one of my colleagues at Birmingham Children's Hospital encourages people to do like keepy uppies or whatever in every hour, gets the kids to do to help blood glucose. Yeah. So there is something. School? There is just generally whenever, like trying to get do some more activity to help with insulin sensitivity. Basically.
I mean, it makes sense. It's not like the glutes, the biggest muscles in the body, and the legs and hamstrings and everything else. So using those big muscles and even just doing something as 10 or 20 squats. I've got a resistance band in my kitchen, and every time I come down and make a cup of tea or coffee from the office upstairs, I just try and do some, just open up my back, just stay with the band, and then just do like 10 or 15 squats, just as a habit of just trying to move more, because it's wild. Like I said, I hadn't gone intentionally for a walk till I was 27, and even just doing all this now still feels new to me, even though I'm so aware of fitness. But it's just because I used to just live a more generally active lifestyle, so you didn't have to think about it. And yeah, like we've just had painters round at our house this week, and I've been saying, like, they've seen me and Steph go out for a walk, and they're like, do you guys do that every day? Like, just go for it? I'm like, yeah. I was like, you guys are moving all day painting. We're sat down behind a laptop, and it's just funny, isn't it? Like, 'cause until you've been on one side and then to the other, you don't realise like the importance of having to change that. But it's super important to just continually stay active.
Lots of people have seen it through lockdown, haven't they? And then suddenly notice when they've had like step counts and then go, oh my goodness, look at the change from being sat here to
But I actually think that was one of the good things about COVID, because people had their 1 hour that they were allowed to go for a walk, and so they took it and they did. And I think a lot of people have kept it. Maybe not for a whole hour, but they kind of realise, actually, I feel better for going out for my hour's walk. And that's become a bit more of a normalised thing. Whereas actually before COVID, before we had a dog, my husband was always like, if we went for a walk on a weekend, he's like, do you think people are going to judge us because we're weird, we're going for a walk and we don't have a dog? Whereas now people wouldn't think that. I do think that's changed. I don't know if Reese was just being oversensitive, but it definitely used to be a thing. You know, you would go for a walk if you had a dog, but like, just go for a walk around the country park. Why would you?
Walk yourself.
So we've talked a lot about exercise, but I did want to come back a little bit more to diet, because we've only really talked about that top level, create a calorie deficit. Like, that's a big topic, but actually I think a lot of the information out there is so nuanced, and people are bombarded with like, oh, but I should cut carbs. Oh, I shouldn't have oats. Oh, I should eat this certain specific fruit, which is going to lower my blood sugar. Like, what is the actual thing that people need to worry about? And are there some things that, you know what, you should focus on, and other things that you can just take with a pinch of salt?
Yeah. So certainly it's following to a point in terms of cardiovascular health, and it will support weight loss depending on how many calories you're having. A Mediterranean style diet, which is looking at whole grains, looking at more pulses, looking at having less red meat, more lean proteins, plant protein, extra virgin olive oil, lots of those healthy fats basically, oily fish, those sorts of things are really in general where we're looking at in terms of health. And then where the adjustments are made are whether people want to adjust carbohydrate to a certain point, and there's more evidence in that in type 2 diabetes than type 1 if you want to. But again, it's whichever approach really works for that individual. But it is about, for the majority of people who have type 2, it's about weight loss of some kind from those elements of the diet. But the quality of their diet is still really important in terms of cardiovascular health. So again, for blood pressure, reduction in salt is really important as well. Then in terms of the type of approach the individual has, as I said before, it's really, it can change. So I think one part of that is that the person, if they found something hasn't worked before, it has, they might find that another element of that's gonna work this time. And nutrition and activity is obviously part of it, and we know certainly when people are maintaining certain health behaviours, so being more active also supports people making certain specific dietary choices. And the other part I didn't mention was fruit and vegetables, obviously, in terms of antioxidant benefits. And then
so is because you can hear when people say fruit, we go, well, fruit's full of sugar. Surely I can't have all this fruit with all this sugar in because I'm pre-diabetic.
So I'd often have the ones that people always pinpoint are grapes, mangoes, and bananas. If you're like, you always hear I'm not allowed to have those, and it doesn't matter. It's the total carbohydrate value. There's so many other benefits.
Like, as in how much carbs are eaten in one sitting, or how much carbs are eating in the whole day?
Yeah, so the more somebody's having more carbohydrate at one point, that will be cause blood glucose to rise for a longer period of time. But so normally we'd be saying like a portion, a handful, spread that out through the day, 2 or 3 portions. You're meeting your requirements with having that with vegetables as well. But it's really lots of different foods have carbohydrates in them, and it's not really to vilify fruit particularly, because obviously there's lots of benefits with vitamins and minerals and fibre. And actually there's key importance of having a certain amount of fibre in someone's diet in terms of cholesterol again. So really that is a classic one of blood glucose levels being high because of a specific food, and not really equating it to how that balances out through the day and what the benefits are. So they can certainly have them. And it's about, again with diabetes, it's about that chronic elevation of blood glucose. So if blood glucose rise and come down within a certain time frame, that isn't an issue. And then certainly there's medications that you can have if somebody needed to support that as well. But the key thing with type 2 for most people is weight loss. And even with, when we talked earlier about the remission type diets, they have done a very much smaller study, the same group in Newcastle, with 20 people who had a BMI which was below 27, so the cutoff for the other was above, and they found people BMI, and the mean BMI dropped from 24.8 or something like this to 22.4 or something. So there was still a benefit even when you're in that normal category, because there's still that benefit of the fat reduction around the liver and pancreas.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because I think often if you're in the healthy range of BMI, you think, well, I don't need to, that doesn't apply to me. But actually there is still some impact on the diabetes.
And so 14 of those 20 people were in remission after a year. So it's still a benefit, because we don't see that presentation as much where someone's in that sort of healthier BMI, but they can still have that dangerous fat around their organs, which we'd want to reduce. And so there's still a benefit too. And as we know, with body composition changing and weight generally creeping up through the years, there's still some benefit. And we obviously don't want people to lose weight, so they're in the below 18.5 and underweight category, but there can certainly be some improvement within that as well.
But specifically visceral fat is what you're targeting there. And doing that through healthy diet changes and increasing resistance training is kind of your shortcut, isn't it? Rather than just calorie deficit by any means.
Yeah, definitely.
So just on the fruit side of things then, because you're saying it's around total carbohydrates, what about the sugar though? And like, is there a limit on the amount of sugar that someone should have? And is it different from just having like normal table sugar to the sugar in fruit? Obviously fruit's coming more with vitamins, minerals, fibre, table sugar. Not quite the same.
So certainly people can have a small amount of sugar. It's normally 10% of their total calorie intake if they're going to have some. But we do try and discourage as much as possible because it will elevate blood glucose levels, and there's no other nutritional benefit to it. And in terms of fruit, the recommendations can be to have a small glass of fruit juice as one of the portions of fruit. Personally, particularly I'm working with women who are pregnant or preconception, I'd rather they had, and I'll recommend not to have fruit juice at all. And also, if someone makes fruit juice, it's very difficult, and this is just very normal to stick to. It's a small glass. If you've made it or you've got a carton open or whatever, to stick to that and have that each day. And it's much more benefit to have the fibres, which are very important in fruit. So that's a really key thing as well to think about when people are, where they're getting the carbohydrate from, but also there are certain changes that can be better. And so with sugar, you can have a small amount. It depends on, are you able? I think it's always being really honest of, are you able to restrict that? Ideally, it wouldn't be adding sugar to teas and coffees and things like this. There are artificial sweeteners.
I shouldn't put one sugar in my coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, because I have, and I've had my HbA1c tested like several times now, and I'm always bang on in the middle of like optimal. So I'm like, is that just because I've got a lot of extra muscle? Is that because I'm healthy? Because I exercise? I probably know I shouldn't have one sugar in my coffee, but I'm like,
I think there's balance though. I have like 1 or 2 coffees a day. I'm gonna have sugar. Like I don't eat chocolate. I don't smash back Haribos. Like I can have my sugar in my coffee. Please.
Please.
There's a small amount that you can have. It is looking at the whole picture, isn't it? It
of
really
course.
is. Yeah.
No, definitely. Yeah, it's because I mean, I think that is like, I guess that's like almost like a benefit to an extent, isn't it? Of like, if you have a lot more muscle, you do a lot more resistance training, then you have these sponges in essence too. If you do eat a little bit more sugar, like your body can handle it a lot better. But yeah, sorry, we were on the fruit,
Yes.
the table sugar and the fruit.
Away
yeah.
from coffee.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. So I was going to say as well, sometimes people vilify artificial sweeteners, and there was old research looking at using different artificial sweeteners and the effect of there being cancer causing. This research was in rats, and also it was in huge amounts of different artificial sweeteners, which just you wouldn't consume in a day. So if they are something that people want to have, there are a variety out there. If people wanted some intense sweet taste to have, it's great to try to get used to having certain things that you're not having them regularly. It just depends on that sweet taste. As you say, if it's a small amount, is it impacting everything? You need it's looking at that whole picture. Yeah.
But I do think once you start having less sweet foods overall, your taste buds do adapt, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
And I've had a lot of clients in the past who said, "Oh, I'm just addicted to sugar." But then actually 6 months down the line, when we've slowly shifted their diet, they'll go and eat something that they used to eat a whole bag of maybe at the beginning, and they'll have one or two and they're like, "Oh my goodness, they're so sweet. I don't even know why I used to like these."
Yeah.
So your taste buds can adapt.
Yeah, they definitely do. Wherever they are, there's different receptors on your tongue. They get conditioned after a period of time. You know, people also say with different fat contents of milk or something would be a classic.
Yeah.
Where a few weeks later, months later, people wouldn't notice the difference.
Yeah.
But at first, you might notice that in your coffee if you're used to having no fat milk to full fat, and then someone serves you, there's quite a difference. Yeah,
Definitely. And so when it comes to blood glucose in general, are there any rules of if you're going to have carbohydrates, they're obviously processed foods going to cause more of a spike, but are there any other kind of patterns of eating that would be better for people to follow, like eating it with something or in certain doses?
Yeah, so most people have a mixed meal. So generally, where you may have heard the measure of glycemic index or glycemic load, where it's looking just at a carbohydrate food glycemic index and seeing what that does with blood glucose levels. But most people eat a mixed meal.
Could you, just for anyone listening, could you explain glycemic index more?
Yeah. So glycemic index is a ranking of different carbohydrate-containing foods and how quickly the push that it has on blood glucose levels rising. So the way it's measured is against glucose itself. So that will be it's ranked as 100. And then they're given different numbers for where they sit. And we don't really need to know the individual numbers, but roughly we need to... What's helpful when making food choices is knowing, is it a slow release carbohydrate, is it a medium type carbohydrate, or is it a very rapid acting carbohydrate to affect blood glucose? And the idea being that you're going to pick more of the slower medium type groups. So slow being things like pulses, lentils, those sorts of things. Medium might be say basmati rice or something like that. But the issue with that is we don't just eat one thing at a time. We'll combine it. So whenever you're adding protein and fats, that blunts the rise in blood glucose levels already. In terms of order of eating, there is some...
Fast would be...
Yes, very fast would be something like Coca-Cola or sugar itself or something like that.
Because you used to see that on the food charts. I'm going back a decade and a half, and it would be good carbs and bad carbs. And good carbs were always viewed as those complex carbs.
Sweet potato.
So that are going to take longer. They're not going to spike your blood sugar as much. And those bad carbs were always vilified as the cookies and the sugar and stuff. And
certainly in a diabetes realm, we might be looking at more of those very rapid acting ones are really good for treating low blood glucose levels if people are having them. So you can sort of define it as being those sorts of ones.
Just to clarify, we do not call them good carbs or bad carbs.
We don't.
I can tell by the way you say.
But, people may be familiar with that kind of language. And particularly diets used to say you can lose weight if you just only have good carbs.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where it came from, do you think?
Yeah. It would also give people sometimes permission. Well, I'm only eating good carbs, so I don't need to pay attention to calories.
Yeah.
I'm eating plenty of, these quote unquote good carbs, but you eat the portion you eat is too much. Just vilifying certain foods, which we try not to do.
And there is something with the order of food. So you can see that potentially, again, blunting blood glucose levels a little bit more. You might be able to think about having more of your protein up front and the vegetables and then the carbs later in the meal. That can see as some response. There is some data to show that can be helpful if people wanted to sort of have something in an order. But generally, a big part of this is, yes, the type and the mix of foods that you're having, but also the amount that you're having. Certainly, if you're having, the more you have, the more you'll see a rise in your blood glucose. But it's all about, does that chronically stay up at a certain point, or does it come back down? Yeah.
I think that order of food is a really interesting one, though, because if it's something you don't need to even change what's on your plate, but if you decide, I'm going to eat the chicken first, and then the broccoli, and then the potato, actually, by the time you get to the potato, there's a bigger chance you're going to already be feeling a little bit full. And you're probably going to eat less of the carbohydrate anyway, without actually feeling like, I'm depriving myself of my potatoes. Yeah. So those are little hacks that people can do that they know are going to have an impact on their blood sugar, but also might make it easier to eat a little bit less and lose that weight without necessarily having to restrict food or be on a diet.
Yeah, definitely. There's always those things of like wins for blood glucose. We would talk about those, like without not adding another task or more effort, how can we do what you're doing now, but just do it slightly differently?
Right.
And see if it works for you. And again, for everybody, as we know, one size doesn't fit all. So you have to see how that works for the individual and see. And for some people, I'd certainly see it with some of our pregnancy patients where we're seeing them quite frequently. So you can really see exactly what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And to come back to that point you've raised a few times where it's about the long-term raise in blood glucose, it's not about the spikes. That kind of contradicts what is kind of trending at the moment, I guess, with these continuous glucose monitors. So things like Zoe, I can't remember some of the other brands that are out there, but the thing that you stick on your arm and then you've got your app on your phone and it tells you after you eat, this made your blood glucose spike. What is the deal with those? Because it seems to make sense. If you don't have that much knowledge about blood sugar, that if you saw it go up, you'd say, probably shouldn't do that and don't eat that food. But actually that isn't the case. Is that right?
Are you ready to lose 30 to 60 pounds in under 6 months without restrictive diets, countless hours exercising, or any guesswork? Well, we help women over 30 do exactly that. Lose weight guaranteed. And 5 to 10 pounds a month is the average weight loss. And that's not a cherry pick statistic, that is the average. Your weight loss results are 100% guaranteed and you will lose unwanted body fat. So apply now at bodysmartfitness.com. But only if you're a woman over 30 and you want to lose 30 to 60 pounds in under 6 months.
I work in a centre where we have been using diabetes tech for a very, very long time, and particularly diabetes tech has come in, particularly for people with type 1 diabetes. And the real part of it is people with type 1 diabetes who are using exogenous insulin, so whether that's via injections or via a device called an insulin pump, which trickles insulin through, they're more at risk of having hypoglycemia, which is very normal, so clinically defined as a blood glucose below 3.5. So, and in that way, you have to act on it to have glucose, and that's why those devices are so important. And it's great that they're now available for more people, and they're now more available, particularly NHS England at the start of this year have made, and in the last few years, in fact, have made other devices as well more available for people with type 1 and increasingly with type 2. And where we're seeing these devices being used in the population who don't have diabetes, we just don't have enough research. We need more longitudinal data to be able to see, does this have an actual impact? And at the moment, we don't really know. And what we know is the health risks are about, as I said, the chronic blood glucose, but the transient blood glucose rises, actually, we don't know what that does in health. And actually, by these devices being more available for those people over the next however many years, we'll start to see what impact that has.
Because those companies will be able to take the data and use it for analysis.
Yeah, and exactly. And that data was initially being collected for that purpose. It's, so we will see. And it is interesting because people, thinking about it, people may be making more healthful choices by seeing changes, but it also may mean that people aren't, because they may see that fried chicken compared to an apple is the example that's often given, has less of an effect. So I'll have more fried chicken than I will of having an apple, and what are the health benefits. So we don't know enough to say that works in that population group. And also it's very narrowly looking at health in terms of just glucose levels, Whereas, so I've hopped on about looking at LDL cholesterol, looking at blood pressure, looking at the whole of someone's health. And actually, interestingly, again, because I've worked so extensively with people with type 1 diabetes using devices where they've had to have them, they've been so helpful. And I'll describe how I remember the first time someone used a flash glucose monitor and said, it's like turning on a light in the room. You know, I've had diabetes type 1 for 30 plus years and I didn't know what was going on because previously people would be just checking blood glucose through a finger stick like 3, 4, 5 times a day. And now they're able to see what's going on in between, but also see the direction of travel because of the arrows in those devices that are able to tell them, particularly how quickly a blood glucose is dropping to how the action they need to do to prevent themselves having a hypo. But so we know that information, but also I know from working with people through this time that we know it's estimated that somebody with type 1 has to do 180 different self-management tasks a day. So that's on top of us in our lives
Holy
who
shit.
don't have type 1.
Yeah.
So that's huge. And you think about the effect on
so
mindset.
what kind of things is that? Like food choices or...
So food choice, counting carbohydrate, checking blood glucose level, working out how much insulin to take, taking the insulin, you know, and it's constant. If they're having a low blood glucose, working out how much, you know, hypo treatment to have. If they're going out, you know, making a plan for whatever they need to do when they're out. So we know that there's a huge impact on emotional, psychological well-being having diabetes itself. So the only other part to that is, are those numbers useful for people who don't have diabetes? Because sometimes it can be very motivating, but also it can be quite overwhelming. And we know at the hospital I work at, we have a great psychology and psychiatry team, and they've trained us as their team as well in lots of therapies to support the people we're with. And certainly there's a tool that we will use in clinic called the diabetes distress tool. So this is an indicator of people going into what we call diabetes burnout. So just having all those tasks constantly, their mind just, you know, thinking. And the two items on that, because it's 2 items that we ask people in their statements, and basically one's about how often do you feel you're failing? How often do you feel you're failing with your diabetes management? And one is how often are you feeling overwhelmed by your diabetes? And basically it's scores 0 to 6 or 1 to 6, and it's not a problem going up to a very serious problem. And that indicates to us where we support the individual or do we refer them on. So I can see it also on another side of we can add elements that may be causing us more anxiety and stress that maybe we don't need in our lives, and actually we can enjoy the food. You know?
So people potentially after everything they eat are looking at their app and thinking, oh, should I have had that? Oh, maybe next time I shouldn't have that. And they don't need to worry.
Yeah, potentially. We can look at sort of healthful food choices and see, is that information telling us what we actually know about the food choices people are making without needing that data? And we all know, like, lots of things have become gamified, looking at step counts, being able to do that, and it can be supportive, or it can potentially be quite overwhelming to see what's going on. And I don't know if you guys wear glucose monitors, I have, but you do watch it change.
Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can imagine certain personalities, it would be that like kick up the bum that maybe they need.
Yeah.
But others, it would just be an obsession, and it would become something that they want to get right. And actually, from what you've said, depending on what you ate that food with, what time of day it was, what exercise you did after, doesn't necessarily mean it's right or it's wrong. Like that's just what happened in that moment. And I think it's almost a danger of people having too much information and not necessarily having the background to interpret that for their situation. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And that just can add extra stress, extra worry about something where they could just eat the whatever it is and enjoy it and enjoy what they're actually doing. Yeah.
And so in terms of the whole concept of using CGM or continuous glucose monitor for weight loss, would you see any benefit for that?
We don't know that. We don't know that data. The reason for having those monitors is about hypoglycemia, really, and the changes in blood glucose levels. And we don't know that impact. We don't know that certainly with weight loss, and we don't know it with the population without diabetes at the moment. Yeah.
And there's one other thing that's a very big topic at the moment, which I did want to pick your brain on, which is GLP-1. So that's that group of medications which Ozempic is part of. And obviously Ozempic was a diabetic management drug originally. And it's now they've realised it helps people with appetite. And so it's been branded under a different name, but it's effectively banded around as Ozempic still, Wegovy. What's your take on it for weight loss specifically? Because it's very well established as a good tool for diabetes, but for weight loss, how do you see it?
Yeah. So certainly it is another tool, and I think it's important. We know that it's very difficult to lose weight. We know that obviously we're here today talking about all the health implications and reasons to do that. So yes, that it's another tool, but certainly it's also important to think about diet and lifestyle, diet and activity as well. And it won't always be the solution without those things being in place. And certainly the side effects that people can have aren't small, really. They're quite big. So being able to utilise that properly. It's also interesting because obviously it's become very popular for lots of people. So in our practice, we're actually in a shortage and not able, and it's been for quite a while, for people with diabetes to be able to obtain those medications, because actually there's a mass shortage of them. So that's quite difficult. So they're not a quick fix solution, unfortunately, but certainly they can be an adjunct to.
Because you're meant
lifestyle.
to, once you start them, go on them for the rest of your life.
Yes.
Or at least that's the advice.
Yes.
That's said next to the medications, which is, it's a fairly big commitment to
It
make
is.
to anything, to say you're going to go on a medication for the rest of your life. But you can understand why. I think it's like over 95% of people who do come off rebound and gain the weight back, because the hunger goes from being a lot more blunted to just coming right back up and often higher. And then, of course, hunger's through the roof. It makes sense that you're going to overconsume on calories.
That is huge, and a commitment, isn't it, for life, to be taking an injection once a week. And if you do stop, which may happen at some point, as you're saying, that's psychologically, that's a huge.
Yeah.
It is, and it's also a financial burden as well.
Yes.
In that sort of sense, like you and then there's, like you mentioned, the risks as well. I do think they have a place, and we have said this, for people where, the risks of not losing weight, taking the medication is going to help you get back down to like a healthier weight, and the benefits are going to outweigh that. But it's, I do just feel like the way it's being banded around for so many people taking it as just, I think even Asda have started selling it now.
What?
Yeah, I seen some recent. I sent it to Steph the other day, and and we get like with a lot of our clients.
I did actually see Boots, like they've got a partnership now.
Yeah.
They've got like a private GP service, and you can get it prescribed via the Boots app.
Well, so this was actually a client, and they said, this is probably a stupid question when we ask it anyway. I was talking to my hairdresser about starting my health journey with Body Smart, and she said, why don't you just do weight loss shots? I have lost 40 pounds, and I knew my answer was I didn't want to just lose weight. I also don't know how those shots would affect my body long term. I didn't know how to react, so I didn't, and it made me feel sad for her, because I know there are so many unknowns with taking the shots. I wanted to talk to her about about it, but didn't want to discard her. How should I handle this in the future? I was honestly taken back by her response and thought she would be happy for me. I used to be a gym rat and be in great shape. I don't know. It was just all up in my feelings in the conversation. And we had quite a few clients who are having this lately, like they're running into, other people who are taking the weight loss shots, and they're just getting like, oh, why don't you just take this? Why don't you just take this? And a lot of the clients are like, well, it's all the other benefits of health that I'm looking for, not just the weight loss. That's maybe not coming with it, but it's also that rebound effect. Like so many people eventually are going to stop taking it. And if maybe you are taking it for vanity metrics or just to, manage your weight a little bit better, it's not solving the root cause of the problem.
And also obviously not doing anything for body composition. So if people aren't doing weight training and resistance training with it, they're going to be losing that muscle mass as well. So it's not just that number. Yeah.
In terms of the way the drugs actually work, because obviously they were originally for managing diabetes, is there something in the way they function that affects insulin resistance and and how insulin resistance makes it harder to lose weight. So is there a kind of argument for it that way?
Yeah, so they basically are receptor agonists. So where they bind, they basically do improve insulin sensitivity, improve insulin secretion. They also, and that's where we saw the improvement in blood glucose, HbA1c levels, and then as a side to that, then you see that actually they're appetite suppressants as well. So they're improving all of those outcomes, which is what you're wanting to see in diabetes. And so in those terms, they're certainly improving outcomes for that. And then yes, you're seeing the benefits of weight loss, which is then where people are wanting to use them more. So all of those aspects together, and it's just similar effects to thinking about when we're talking about the very low calorie diets or the bariatric surgery, those metabolic health benefits that you can have from weight reduction. So it's another tool, but it's interesting how much they've exploded. I remember using some of the first ones of those, gosh, I can't remember when they came out, 2008, 2009, something like this, and that's when they were being used for HbA1c reduction, and then you saw this weight loss and satiety, appetite suppression as well that was happening, or the delaying of gastric emptying that was happening through that, which was meaning people weren't wanting to eat as much at one time.
Yeah.
It's originally abstracted from, is it like a lizard?
Is it?
It's something like that, or like Psychum from maybe find out.
Yeah, there is something like that.
It's like, it's some sort of like lizard or some sort of animal that's just has like a really reduced amount of appetite, and they found out that was like GLP-1, and they've extracted it from that animal, and that's how the drug was originally manufactured. I'm probably butchering that, but I'm sure Sai will correct me somewhere.
There was actually one thing that I saw recently on TikTok, which was rice Ozempic. Apparently if you cook rice, don't eat the rice, throw away the rice, but drink the water, the starches in the water have the same effect.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Dietitian says, okay.
I don't know if you should get your nutritional advice from TikTok trends. Yeah.
I'm gonna look at that now, though. There's definitely certain benefits for using them. It's just how people are using them.
Yeah. And so we've covered a lot about type 2 diabetes and a little bit about what people can do if they're already in that space. But a big part of what we're talking about day in, day out is prevention. So if you could give advice to, oh, sorry, the lizards are on the screen.
There you go.
Got distracted. Yeah. It is, it's from the 80s he found out that the lizards had these hormones. You were right, Jay.
The stimulated insulin,
Nobody believed him.
Well,
but they're kicking themselves now, aren't they?
There's a lot of that, isn't it? Like a lot of medicines are extracted from plants and even animals to an extent. So, I mean, the wild and interesting world of medicine.
Yeah, that is a random fact you had in your brain.
It was, yeah. There's many in there at times.
So, sorry, back to prevention.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people who are listening hopefully are thinking, I'm listening to this because I am wanting to take proactive measures for my health. What would be the things that you would say to somebody who they're not in that pre-diabetic space, maybe they are just in that band? What can they do to take back control and bring things back to a healthy space?
So I think one thing, as we were saying, is if you're not sure, you can definitely have measurements. So I'd look at checking what you can do your HbA1c, fasting glucose, looking at your cholesterol levels and the split, so looking at your HDL and LDL within that. So if you have that, it's called a full lipid profile if you're asking for it. And that will also tell you your triglycerides, which are the fats that are also part of what makes up that ectopic fat around your pancreas and liver as well. And looking at blood pressure. So they're simple measures that you can have to see where you are now. And also thinking, and particularly if you do have any family or that have any relations that do have type 2 or a pre-diabetes or have had gestational diabetes, you will be at an increased risk, and also of your ethnicity as well. So all of those factors are quite important. So measuring, knowing where your starting point is now is really important. And you, as I say, you can ask your GP. If you're not able to do that, then there's certain companies that you can definitely, depending on where you are in the world, you can certainly be able to attain that. The next part is definitely looking at your diet and looking at where are the factors that you think you're having certain elements in your diet that perhaps you have question on. Perhaps you're having more, it might be, some people find they're having more snacking behaviours. Certainly there's things of looking at maybe the elements of trans fats, and we didn't mention those, and saturated fats as well. So they're things which are going to affect LDL cholesterol. So already by switching those fats into healthier fats like monounsaturated fats like olive oil type, rapeseed oil type based things are going to be an improvement already. And within that it is looking at weight loss. If you are at a higher BMI and you're wanting to, then which parts of your diet do you think you're wanting to change? And obviously if you're needing support and accountability, that's looking for that as well. And then, as we're saying, it's activity, and particularly it's, as we were saying, whether it's your squats or every hour, or, going for a walk. So we were talking about those 10 minutes post-meal. And then looking at resistance training as well, which sometimes people really miss out, don't they? And really thinking about where you're going to do that, and whether that's body weight exercise that you're able to do at home. So those three elements are really where I'll be starting at to start looking. But it's good to get the measurements, because that can be really quite... So unlike continually having measurements, you're having measurements at periods of time that you can think, okay, what do those numbers mean to me? And to be honest, whether they're at a risk or not, it's still important to do those other factors in your life as well. But it could really give you the measure to pick up if you do, like we were saying with type 2 diabetes, things like this. Potentially, if you have particularly other risk factors and family who have it, it's a good thing to indicate if you have at all, you can do something about it and get the support.
Definitely. That's really good advice, because I think it's something that people wouldn't necessarily get checked unless they had a worry. But you were saying, like, as part of your prevention, just see what your baseline is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to scare people. It's if you're wanting to be proactive, that's a way of looking.
Yeah. Great advice.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming all the way up to Liverpool today.
Thanks so
much.
much.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.